Hello, and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Data lakes are notoriously complex. For data engineers who battle to build and scale high-quality data workflows on the data lake, Starburst is an end-to-end data lakehouse platform built on Trino, the query engine Apache Iceberg was designed for. Starburst has complete support for all table formats, including Apache Iceberg, Hive, and Delta Lake. And Starburst is trusted by teams of all sizes, including Comcast and DoorDash. Want to see Starburst in action? Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/starburst today and get $500 in credits to try Starburst Galaxy, the easiest and fastest way to get started using Trino. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'd like to welcome back Dipti Borkar to talk about her work on Microsoft Fabric and performing analytics on data without having to move it to various locations. So, Dipti, can you start by introducing yourself for anybody who hasn't heard you in previous episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great to be back. I was remembering the previous two times, and so third time's the charm. So excited to be here. I'm Dipti Borkar. I'm part of the Azure Data Leadership Team, VP and GM at Microsoft, and responsible for our strategic ISVs, including Azure Databricks, as well as Fabric developer experiences. So great to be on, Toby.
And for folks who haven't heard you previously, if you can just remind us how you first got started working in data.
Yeah, it's been a while now. 20 plus years, started off in the database lab at UC San Diego, doing research on, at that point, semi-structured data. So the world was moving from SQL to semi-structured, and the interactive applications were starting to go big. So that's kind of where I started off. Started my journey in DB2 distributed on the Linux side of things in the core engine, so storage and indexing kernel. And I've been pretty lucky to be involved in pretty major step functions in data. As we were talking earlier, it hasn't been a dull day since since I started, and so relational to NoSQL with JSON was a pretty big switch. So was the forefront of that disaggregated stack with a lot of open source tech, Spark, Presto, founded a company in that space to drive simplicity. And now it's Gen AI meets data, and it's the next 5 to 10 years of innovation. So it's been a fun journey in data management, and honestly, it's still evolving. I feel like I'm constantly learning and transforming myself over every time there's a new technology and trying to stay relevant.
So recently you moved to the team that supports the Microsoft Fabric product. I'm wondering if you can just give some sense about what it is, some of the story behind how you came to be involved in that, and some of the ways that people should be thinking about Microsoft Fabric as it relates to their own work in their data systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to share. There's a lot of people working on Fabric, right? It's a pretty major investment at Microsoft within Azure Data itself. And if you think about, if you look away from Fabric for 1 minute and just look at data platform teams and what they've had to deal with, there's a lot of complexity, right? Over the years, there have been many products and tools that have services that have emerged with the goal of solving a problem, but that has added even more complexity and fragmentation, right? When you look at data platform teams and all the services and products that they use, you think of Matt Turk's mad landscape, right? Machine learning, AI, and data landscape. And in fact, this year was the 10th year of publishing that landscape, and it's getting more and more and more complex. So if you the logos keep shrinking every year in size, right? And you can barely recognize them at this point. And so if data platform teams are dealing with that level of complexity, it essentially just takes a lot more time to innovate, time to get insights, time to market. And as we've talked with, and as the Fabric teams talk with customers, whether it's a CIO or a data platform team leader, organizations want to simplify. They want to simplify and reduce costs at the at the basis of it, and then obviously be faster on innovating, differentiating on top of that, right? And so the complex architectures have been driven out of this, so many products in this space, it's gotten much harder. And in some ways, that's sort of what Fabric envisions and promises to simplify, is that you can there are many platforms that call themselves unified, or that with this promise of having a simplicity across all of these components. But as a cloud, we do have all the pieces. We have many pieces that are involved in a data platform, from business intelligence with Power BI to pipelines, data flows with Azure Data Factory, to our warehouse, right? Lakehouse, real-time intelligence. We have event streams, event hubs, etc. All of this really can come together, and that's what Fabric is. It's combines the best of all of these core products and services into a single unified platform, which is a SaaS platform. It's a software as a service platform, so that it's a really seamless experience, low code, no code. And what we've envisioned to do is have as minimal knobs as possible, so that everything is sort of auto managed for you, AI powered underneath the covers. And that's the unified platform that customers can use. So essentially, taking away that complexity, trying to get to market faster for our customers, is the eventual promise that Fabric's making. And with the name like Fabric, it kind of encompasses, the vision is to encompass everything. And it's been phenomenal since the GA last uh, November. At Ignite, we announced GA, and we just announced a couple of weeks ago, where we have about 11,000 customers on Fabric already. And so very, very great to see the momentum. And I think it's just the beginning. We'll evolve over time. There's lots to build. There's lots of adoption that will happen as well.
With the fact that Fabric is focused on being this unified location for data across an organization, particularly for larger businesses that have multiple different business units that each have their own little silos of data, what is your heuristic for when somebody is asking, is Fabric the tool for me? And what are the cases where you can say Fabric is a bazooka to your fly and you're actually better suited using some other tool?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And one that we get in a slightly different format is, where do I start, right? What's the best place to start off? And what we've seen with Fabric, number one, is the business model is very different from a range of other services and so on. If you take away the Microsoft stack for a minute, and you think about a stack that a data engineer might leverage in their data platform. You might have Snowflake, you might have Fivetran to do some of the ETL, ELT. You might have Tableau to do the BI, right? You might have DBT and other products, Spark and other technologies. Each of these ends up being provisioned, and oftentimes the users over provision, right? And each of these need to be bought separately, managed separately. It's a separate line item in the budget. And so when you look at the complexity across these, some of it is actually the business model and the cost, right? With Fabric, you buy one product. So you buy one thing, right? And you can use all of these experiences within that product. So the business model itself is pretty transformational, where once you start off with Fabric, you can start off with Data Factory, where you might pull in data using a data pipeline or data flows, which have lots of 200, 300 connectors. And then what we've seen is, once you get started with that, you then end up using more and more workloads, because it's a pretty seamless experience. You don't have to go and ask someone for a permission to buy, either from a marketplace, or go back to your admin and say, hey, can you enable this, or we are running out, can you over provision? It's all of it is serverless, right? And so first thing, you only pay for what you use within each of these, and it's all at your fingertips. So typically we see users start off with one and then use three workloads, four workloads, right, across Fabric. And over time, more and more get used. And so the simplicity of usage is what we're seeing. So going back to the question of, where do people get started, what is it good for, what it may not be good for, what we're seeing is pipelines with Data Factory, it's used quite a bit, lake houses, and and data engineering workload gets used quite a bit. And then the warehouse, right? So you sort of for your medallion architecture, you typically have your raw data, and then your silver, gold, bronze, silver, gold, etc. And so they're starting off with one, and they're starting to leverage others. So depending on your need, first thing you should only buy the SKU that makes sense for you, and it's 2 months free trial, each month at $17,000, I believe. And so that's pretty great to get started off. And then you can start off with really small SKUs, right? The F SKUs start at F8 and so on, and so you can pay very little to begin with, and then grow over time to larger SKUs if that's where the product takes you, and you start using more workloads. Now, in terms of, so I would say starting points tend to be pipelines, right? Usage, ingestion. So you start with ingesting into OneLake, which is the foundation of Fabric, and then using other engines on top of it.
On the point of data lakes and lake houses, there has definitely been a significant trend towards that as the default location for data for an organization. Data lakes in general have come to be more well understood from their first introduction, where there was all the talk about data swamps, and the lakehouse architecture in particular has helped to give people a common architectural perspective on how to approach that. And I've seen in recent years less emphasis on the data warehouse, more on the data lake or data lake house. I'm wondering, what are some of the motivating factors that you see for that overall trend towards lakes being a more widely accepted and more widely adopted approach to how to manage data at the organizational scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I'm still learning. Like, I've been in this space for many, many years. Like 2018, 2019 is when I got involved, working with a lot of the internet companies at that point. And since then, a lot has changed, right? So, in terms of motivation factors, the early ones, it was the disaggregation of the stack, right? It was, separation of storage and compute was a big deal because they could scale at different levels. And cost is different for each one too, right? Compute in general was a little bit more expensive. Storage, with object stores, etc., it got significantly cheaper to store large amounts of data with ADLS and S3 and others. And so I would say the starting point, which was the disaggregated stack, and this separation of storage and compute, is proven, right? It's absolutely proven, and that continues to be one of the motivating factors. The other one that emerged over time is just no lock-in, right? Open formats, and it started off with the file formats, which were, at that point, ORC, Avro, Parquet. Parquet kind of emerged as the more popular one, and then table formats layered on top of it to make it more structured, to simulate in some ways a warehouse. All the metadata, the table schema got layered on top, and of course, Delta Lake, Iceberg, and Hoodie and others emerge. But foundationally, the motivation is it's open formats, which means that customers are not locked in, and this has allowed for a lot more interop across platforms. So you can store data in one, but you could may have your own internal engine. A lot of enterprises, innovate internally. They might have their own either Python libraries or their own engines, whether it's a query engine and a batch engine. They could run on top of it, and of course, just the interop across even the commercialized software, right, on top of these open formats is pretty significant now. And so that continues to be a huge driver, is no more walled gardens, right? Truly open data. And this is one that Fabric has adopted as well. I would say that, cost, like I was talking about earlier, is also a big one, where storage costs are significantly lower now. Warehouses are, your more traditional warehouses are still monoliths, right? So you still have that grouping of storage and compute, which becomes expensive. Here you pay for it in different tiers, and so costing becomes, it will become, significantly cheaper over some of the other, even on-prem data warehouses that customers still have, right? A large amount of. And with the innovative models like Fabric's capacity unit model, where you have virtual currency that you could use and spend across all of these different workloads, that will help reduce costs. So you're not over provisioning for everything. Together you have one product that you could use with the same bucket of virtual currency. Now, the other things that are emerging when we look at verticals, right? So you have retail, financial services, travel, telco, media, like lots and lots of verticals. Each of them, in some ways, has become a technology company now, right? They have some part of tech that is driving their innovation and their new products. But even then, it's very hard to keep up with new skills, with new products that come up with, maybe it's a warehouse or maybe it's a new tool here and there. Data lake houses essentially create that foundation of one lake, which gives you visibility across all the different aspects of data you might have. And so from a team skill perspective, if you at least have some base level of skill that you can build on top of, so you're not every 3 years you're not bringing in new tech, which means new skills. Hopefully this stays for a long period of time. It's lasted over, I would say it started off with Hadoop, which was extremely complex, right? And people didn't see much value of it, to a point where it's completely sassified now and seamless, where you don't need a PhD in data engineering to start using this. So skills have, the level of skill, you can start off with base level of skill now that data lakes have become pretty they're everywhere, right? Everyone sort of has a common understanding of a data lake, a lake house, and what that means. And finally, I would say just Gen AI and innovation that's ongoing. You do need, your models are only as good as your data, right? And so increasingly, whether you are using the core foundational models, the OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, or other open source ones, or you're training your own, a lot of this is going to happen on open lakes. And so that's the other reason to, increasingly we're seeing a lot more users, enterprise customers coming into us saying, hey, we this combination of Gen AI and open data lakes and OneLake for us is tell us more. Like, we believe in this foundational architecture because that's going to be the next set of innovation that continues, and we want to make sure we are starting off at the right point with open data lakes. So looking forward, it's going to be about Gen AI and custom models, enterprises creating their own on top of their own proprietary data. All of these will be sitting in, the data will be sitting in open formats in data lakes.
On that note of open and open formats, open lakes, Microsoft has been investing substantially into the open source ecosystem in recent years. And Fabric, I noted, relies at least in part on various open source components. I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the benefits that the product team has seen on layering on top of those existing open source solutions, and what are the elements that were built specifically for Fabric that are proprietary and built in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, it's been fantastic for me to see and be involved, continue to be involved in open source. Right, I've been involved in many projects in the past, over the past 12 to 15 years, and it's great to see the Microsoft data stack also. Not only adopting open source, which is the beginning, but also giving back, being more involved in the community, right? Which not necessarily a lot of companies do. It started off with Delta Lake, right? So that was the foundation, that was the primary format that we adopted, and one of the big reasons was it's the we have a lot of customers that are already on Delta, given our Azure Databricks service, right? It's a mission critical service for us, and our customers. We have a lot of data in ADLS Gen 2, which is Delta. So that's kind of where we started off. In fact, to embrace Delta, all our engines were rewritten in large parts because they needed to natively support Delta. right? It's a pretty big change moving from a proprietary format, especially for Microsoft, right, to a totally open format, and then rewriting SQL, rewriting the pipelines, rewriting Power BI, even, right, so that it can directly access Delta. Even without an engine in the middle, without a SQL engine. So Power BI now supports Direct Lake, where you could just go and directly read Delta Lake files on Parquet, and it saves a lot of cost, and it's faster because we've we've optimized on top of that. We use our there's a sorting order that we add on top for compression as well, which is called Vertipack. And so we've taken the base open source, but we've optimized on top of it, right? We continue to add in our own innovation and IP, of course, on on top of the core open source. And so it started off with Delta. A few weeks ago, we announced Iceberg support, right? So it is Iceberg is coming to OneLake as well, and so customers now have an option of picking which format they want, which means that not only do we have full interop with Azure Databricks, which is our service, but also with Snowflake, which we announced. I was at the Snowflake Summit last week, and so that interop between Snowflake, Iceberg, where it might be sitting in S3, for example, can now be shortcutted into OneLake and used as well. And so, we truly believe that storage should be open, format should be open. This allows for massive interop across platforms. And with Fabric and OneLake, there are capabilities like shortcutting and mirroring that really gets you the single view of your data estate. Wherever your data might be, it might be in a different cloud, it might be in a different format, all of that accessible through Fabric. So formats is sort of the foundation, right, as we all know and you're very familiar with. But on top of that, of course, the engines are now also embracing open source. And so last week we announced our native Spark engine, which is now built in with Gluten and Velox as the it's kind of a composable stack now, right, for Spark. And we've seen significant improvements in performance as well as reducing the amount of CPU used, right? So you're moving from Java to C++. It's a pretty big optimization. And we've seen this with, essentially the standard benchmarks, TPCDAs, TPC H and TPCDS in terms of how much it benefits. Now, Velox, for example, is essentially it's a set of operators, right? And it can be used within any engine, right? In fact, it's fantastic to see my old team's innovation sort of being used within Fabric, and we're building on top of it and collaborating with Intel and Meta and others. And so that has been fantastic to see. The other project that we are extremely involved with and our founding members of is the Apache X table. So all of this interop needs to be seamless, right? Otherwise you're adding yet another layer of complexity for our users, and we don't want to leave it to them to deal with this. And so that's where Xtable comes in. We're partnering with OneHouse and GCP and others, and our GSL Labs, Gray Systems Lab, that's part of the Azure Data product team, is extremely involved with this effort. And that's going to be the core to interop between the formats, right? So in Iceberg, Delta, and others, essentially the metadata layer is separate. Like it's different how they handle metadata. And so Xtable is used at runtime to essentially create the metadata layer for both formats, one to the other if it does not exist, so that over time it'll be bidirectional access. You could read, write to both Delta and OneLake. Yeah. So exciting to see all of this open source. Honestly, it's very, very good to see both projects that I've been involved with to be leveraged, but also that I continue to get to be involved. And at the end of the day, customers benefit, right? Customers win with when we use more open source. Of course, we have to be thoughtful and careful and make sure the enterprise grade security is added on top, etc. And going back to your point on layering, the core open source is great. We need to innovate on top of that, making sure that our customers are well protected as well.
And in that stack of open source, proprietary, particularly when you get into the security layering and making something enterprise accessible and enterprise ready, what are some of the most interesting or complicated engineering and integration challenges that you're running into?
Yeah, I'm not involved with every aspect of Fabric, of course, right? But in terms of integration, I mean, honestly, the first big jump to rewriting the engines was pretty transformational, right? It took some time to get there and not just support it, but actually get it performant, right? And optimize the stack with various things. We now have caching built in on top of OneLake, for example, to optimize that as well. Security layering is and making sure that it's every workload that we have in Fabric, because the the scope and the breadth is pretty wide, right? It's pretty wide surface area, and so making sure that everything is protected. There's consistency across each of these workloads from a security perspective. So VNet support, for example, and we're building in one security on top, which continues to be, it's a journey, right? You don't get, it takes time. So it's not that you start off with one thing and you can get it done. We're adding one security as a layer on top, where on top of OneLake, where you have extremely fine grained access control for every workload. The way that the way that it emerges, every workload currently, like SQL, obviously is extremely mature, and we have a fine grained access control within it. But to have this consistency and security across all the workloads consistently, it's taken time. So it's been interesting to see, that unification on principle. It is really great for customers, but it is actually very hard to develop and get there, right? The SaaS experiences as well. It's simple to say, okay, no knobs, minimal knobs, right? But what that means underneath the covers is you really need to ensure that you're optimizing for a range of use cases. Typically, you might say, oh, with straight out of the box open source, hey, set this config to X and set that config to Y and that to Z. And, for this use case, that's the best config. Well, if there are no knobs, you have to do everything underneath the covers. And so that's the other area that is challenging, is how do you, auto optimize for a range of workloads, as well as use AI and, ML techniques underneath the covers to actually make it happen.
On that note of AI and embedding generative AI and other forms of AI into the data layer, I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the benefits that you see of having the Microsoft Copilot functionality as an integrated piece of the Fabric product versus something that people can use out of band and then apply those changes. Just some of the ways that that changes the thinking around how the data platform is supposed to work, how people are supposed to interact with these data engineering, data analytics use cases, and also some of the potential risks and problems around reliability, given the fact that generative AI is non-determinative.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we're still all, Microsoft is obviously leading the revolution, or, this era in some ways. And it's so great to be part of that. If you leave data out for a minute and just talk about, the promise of Gen AI and what it allows us to do, productivity gain is a big one. Right, whether it's data engineering, whether it's a doctor typing in their notes, whether it's a financial analyst trying to figure out the market. Productivity and reducing the amount of effort that anyone does is really one of the biggest promises of Gen AI, right? And that's why you call it a co-pilot. It's not the pilot yet. It is a co-pilot, and it assists humans in some ways, and data engineers in our world to do more with less, to do things faster, to do things with less errors, if and in some ways. And so that, because you have more data at hand, because it's trained on a lot more information. And so productivity, I think, is the number one thing that most enterprises are trying to begin with, right? This means that it needs to be a part of the experience, right? Because it's a behavioral change otherwise, where if it's not a part of that product and experience, you have to kind of switch, go somewhere else, try something else out, and then come back, right? Versus if Copilot, sort of, in any AI experience, is natively within the product experience, it becomes seamless, it becomes easier to use. and it becomes a habit. It needs to become a behavior. It's a behavioral change, right? So that's where Copilot is part of various other Microsoft products. GitHub, for one, has its own Copilot. VS Code has its Copilot. Fabric has its Copilot, and this is now generally available as well, but with our Power BI Copilot experience. And essentially, what it allows people to do is have a lot more a broader view of their data. You can ask about any data set, even if you don't have that information, or maybe the tribal knowledge doesn't exist within your team. The co-pilot will know it, right? And allow you to create complex dashboards, create NL to SQL, essentially anything with natural language to the output format, right, is taken care of. And we've seen that, especially in for non-technical users, this becomes a big driver, because they may not know SQL, they may not know how to create complex dashboards, but they now have the power to do a lot more with the data that they have access to. And so Copilot comes in very useful in that way. So every experience within Fabric, whether it's the warehouse experience, the data science experience, the Power BI, as I mentioned, etc., has a Copilot, and will have more as we continue to innovate. Now, your question around safety, reliability, and also it doesn't have all the information. You might still have a lot of tribal information knowledge within the company that needs to be taught to the co-pilot in some ways. And so we have the notion of AI skills within Fabric, which means that you can actually update the responses for certain prompts based on what you know as accurate, right? A good one is we had our the project name for Fabric in before it was announced was Trident, and there's a lot of information on Trident everywhere, and that correlation may or may not exist between what Trident is and what Fabric is. And so prompt, updating prompt responses and making sure you give correct one to the users is something that is is part of the product. So AI skills is a good one. But in terms of you might still have hallucinations are in some ways real, we with these LLMs. And so there's still a lot more work in general to do with safety and reliability, but we take it it's we take it extremely seriously. A lot of these are there's limits and throttling, etc., built in, and hope over time it'll keep getting better and better. Now we have multimodal responses, right, that are possible. So it's not just text. There will be visuals, audio, etc. So with every step we have to build in that the responsibility, that build in responsible AI to be part of it.
On that note of modality and also on the subject of AI, that brings us back around to the idea of the data lake being a de facto and default storage interface where up until recent memory, the primary type of data that everybody was interacting with was textual or tabular. Now, with AI and the idea of vector embeddings, multimodality, we're bringing in more of this unstructured and semi structured data, whether it's in the context of LLMs and retrieval augmented generation, or in the context of more detailed search functionality around being able to search for audio and images. And I'm wondering how that element of multimodality, AI, retrieval augmented generation is being factored into the ways that the Fabric team is thinking about the role that they play in this ever expanding data ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're seeing both on the analytics side, but also on the operational side, a lot of innovation happening, right? So if you start off with the Gen AI applications, more the simple ones, right? The easiest way to get going is in embed a bot into the website, which does a lot of various variety of things, right? Gives buying recommendations, customer support, handling a range of things. And for those we have the vector index obviously comes in very handy. Cosmos DB, which is extremely widely used and is actually used for used by ChatGPT as one of the backend databases, offers vector indexing. Our Postgres offers vector indexing, and so there's on all our databases essentially offer support for a vector index, so that that context is stored, and you can build these very very rich Gen AI applications on top. Now, on the other hand, you have your lakes, right? As we were talking about, we've been talking for some time. That is, you obviously have structured data on top, but now you have there's a lot of semi-structured data as well. You might have images, logos for companies that you want to analyze, etc. And currently, there's a deep integration between Fabric as well as like AI Studio and our Azure AI side services, right? So that's one. But over time, and vector search is part of our Azure AI experience, right? So you can have vector search that you can support on top of the lake. But yeah, I mean, stay tuned. I mean, these experiences are getting more and more integrated, and so today you might have to use two or three services to pull it together. Tomorrow, you it's all built in, and it's a seamless experience. So one aspect that we're seeing is it's also new that customers just want to have it available as easy as possible, right? So that they're not stuck with doing all this integration work across these services together. And so while the services exist today, with whether it's vector indexes as part of our databases, vector search, which is part of Azure AI, on top of OneLake, and so on, it will be even more seamless over time as more, as more SaaSification in some ways happens on the Gen AI stack.
And then bringing it around to your experience in this space, as we've noted, you previously worked at Ahana, which was very focused on this lakehouse paradigm. You have a lot of context in data lakes in general. I'm wondering, what are the ways that your prior experience at Ahana, working in the Presto ecosystem, leveraging cloud storage, data lakehouse architectures, has informed the work that you're doing at Fabric, and some of the ways that it's a continuity and some of the ways that it is a new experience?
Yeah, it's been quite some time in the lakehouse space. Founding a company on lakehouses itself shows how bought into the tech I was, and so there's a few different aspects, right? I get to influence and help the teams on an open source front for sure. Still actively participating with through a lot of the projects that we talked about. But the other aspect is actually just the entrepreneurial, nature and attributes that are core to what I have been doing, right, in the past, and in some ways bringing in new ideas, taking starting new things like. Zero to ones are always hard, whether it's as a startup or whether you're doing it within a large corporate company with the pockets, right? Everyone resources are scarce everywhere. In some ways, you always want to do 100 things and you can do five. And so in some ways that entrepreneurial characteristic has helped me drive new areas. For example, with Fabric, we are now opening up the platform. So we obviously have our 6 workloads that are core and that are Microsoft workloads, in some ways Power BI and others within Fabric, right? But there are a lot of areas there which are, might be narrower gaps that we may not invest in, and it makes sense for our partners to come in and build on top of Fabric and integrate into it natively, allowing them to have these experiences as well. And so we have opened up the platform. So not only is it open data, it's open APIs, but the platform itself has been opened up with the workload development kit that I announced at Microsoft Build, which was our big developer conference a few weeks ago, where any ISV, any startup can come in and build a native experience on top of Fabric, right? And so in some ways, Fabric is as an OS, in some ways a data operating system. Microsoft has its set of apps, right? And now we are integrating in ISVs to come in and pull in their own native apps into Fabric, and really make it a strong ecosystem. Overall, at the end of the day, customers win. They have a lot more experiences, capabilities to choose from. And so a couple of examples that we announced were SAS, Informatica, Esri for geospatial, Neo4j for graph, Teradata, yeah, we have a warehouse, but a Teradata engine on OneLake, and also Prophecy, so for master data management. So this is just the beginning, right? We will have more and more ISVs get pulled in, and then the other areas where I've been able to sort of get more zero to one new experiences, built new experiences on Fabric, is bring technologies like GraphQL, which is essentially an API on top of data services into Fabric. So we added GraphQL support, we added user data functions natively within Fabric. So these are all kind of zero to one experiences that have it's been great to work with the teams to drive and kind of deliver out. So they're now publicly announced, so I can finally talk about it. But yeah, just being involved in completely new areas, driving the ecosystem, all right, because fairly connected with the data space and the products and the leaders within it. And then I would still say, having that customer first mindset. As a founder, you really still, you're constantly thinking about the customer base. You talk to hundreds of customers and well, prospects, I would say. They're with the hope of being customers. But here, I can leverage a lot of that background and the rich solution architectures that I've been exposed to in the past, now with Fabric, and really kind of innovate at a massive scale, right? So it's been really fun, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial services, telco. Lot of adoption that's happening with very large ISVs as well as enterprises, and so it's been great to influence all of these areas.
And in your experience of working in this space, working on Fabric, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen that platform applied?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's always great stories. The most recent one, I like speed. I like driving fast, and I follow Formula One and all this. And there was a McLaren is one of that we highlighted, one of the users, and that is using our real time intelligence stack that we recently announced to store a lot of their data, right? And to be able to, because obviously very high speeds of ingestion needed, the ability to analyze this at great speed. So that's a really good one, and personal favorite for me as well. But I would say it's been interesting to see how creative our customers are getting with using Fabric in it's across verticals. It's really a horizontal platform, so helping with medical researchers, given electronic medical records, for example, getting in financial data into, so benchmark data, composite data, things like that, through various different sources into OneLake, so that they have a single view of that data. That's another. And so I think the multi-cloud aspect, the shortcutting aspect of OneLake has truly been why it's something that a lot of customers are very interested in, because we've had virtualization for a long period of time. It's not, that virtualization concept itself isn't new, but the ease of which we enable it, and the fact that we write everything into by default into Delta Lake, and you immediately can then access this data through various other workloads. That part of it is quite revolutionary. So I think that is going to drive a lot more data gravity into OneLake. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see more and more use cases on top.
In your experience of working in this space, transitioning into the Fabric team, understanding the use cases, the customer base, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned in the process?
Yeah, I think a lot of good lessons learned. In some ways, I see, as we've evolved over the last 5 years in the data lakes, it's good to see people taking the mistakes made in the past and using, fixing them in some ways, and leveraging them. In terms of lessons learned, I would say, that last mile of making it enterprise grade, where we have many fundamentals that we need to get to for GA, whether it's a security is a big one, scale testing, etc. That continues to be hard, and it takes time. So there's no free way to get there faster. Still have to go through that process and in building good enterprise software, right? There's no way out for it. And I mean, honestly, it's very important, right? The mission critical applications that we're involved with, it's absolutely critical we go through that process and make sure that we've not only the capabilities are there, but it's reliable, it's stable, the high availability is built in, right? So many aspects of the foundations that you just expect out of a Microsoft service. It takes time, and it's still hard, right? Because everything is so tightly integrated. You have to make sure that the solution architecture is right. Internally, the design is correct. There's no holes. So that process continues to be hard. And I always feel like when you build the next set of software, something will get easier. At least with that, it still takes time. Let me think. In terms of adoption, whenever there's a new product, right? I've gone through this process many times in the past. The adoption itself, it takes some time to educate. Education is a big part of the learning experience for customers. And of course, with Microsoft, it's a extremely well-known brand. There's a lot of expectations out of that brand as well. And so, the adoption phase, it's been phenomenal to see how fast Fabric has grown and been adopted. But even then, right, it is a process. Adoption takes time. Education, community building, all of these things remain critical in terms of getting customers, end users comfortable with the tech. Training is a big part of it. So we're putting a lot of these things in place to make sure that at the end of the day, it's a new product. And so we need to make sure that our customers have all the tools available to make them successful. Otherwise, in some cases, it may not leave a good taste in their mouths. Yeah.
As you continue to invest in Fabric, continue to explore the ecosystem of data lakes, data lake houses, and see the ways that people are applying them, what are some of the projections that you have for the future of data lake analytics, data lake house architectures, the role of AI in the data engineering and data analytics ecosystem?
Yeah, it's going to be a fun next 5 years, Tobias. It'll be interesting to see, how it all kind of continues to come together. I'm seeing a lot of consolidation, right? Essentially, we've seen consolidation now, first in the analytics stack, right, where with Fabric, a lot of these pieces are sort of consolidated in. Gen AI is part of it, yeah, right? Is being consolidated in, where we'll see increasingly even applications have obviously their operational apps, OLTP apps. There's a real-time interface to it. There's an analytics interface and a Gen AI interface to all of these apps, which means that the platforms behind it will also, the more consolidated they are, the easier it will be for customers to build not only the back end analytics services, but also the front end customer facing services, right? So I do see, in general, more consolidation happening in the space. Now, Gen AI itself will evolve into becoming a lot more robust. I mean, it's been mind blowing already, but you can only imagine over the next 5 years as more GPUs are available, as more training happens, as more data sets, as more custom models start evolving on proprietary data sets. There's still a lot of proprietary data that enterprise companies have, right? And so as these evolve, there will be interesting co-pilots that emerge over time that will also get built in. So Gen AI itself will emerge, and so the hope is at the end of the day that our job as the way I've seen it is as people building these platforms, we need to keep this promise of simplification and unification, and help customers sort of reduce confusion in some ways, and help customers be successful. Because as we've seen many times, people adopt technologies, and they may not see the benefits of it. So we really want, with this phase of innovation, as everyone invests in Gen AI and open data, we really want them to get the most out of it. right? So anything that will speed that process, I think, will over time emerge into our products, and it's great to be part of it, part of the journey.
Are there any other aspects of Microsoft Fabric, data lakes, and lakehouses, your experience working in this ecosystem that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I think we've talked about a lot of different aspects. You covered a lot of ground, Tobias. So thank you so much for all the interesting questions, and the in some ways the ordering that you had as well. Honestly, I think that we're still it's a great platform, but we're still starting, and looking forward to seeing where it goes, and hopefully in this process make a lot of customers successful and get them to innovate on top of Fabric.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you and your team are doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's free to reach out to me, LinkedIn, various other channels. Um, Gaps in, I think there is a lot more technology now. I think the gap is probably in adopting that technology, and really understanding that tech, embracing it. We still see so many enterprises, or that are maybe behind the curve, right? And I think it's really time now where data lakes are mainstream. So if you're not using this tech, in any form, like some form, then you are falling behind, right? And so it really is. There's a lot of great tech that's available today, whether it's clouds, whether it's other companies, and so as CIOs, as CDOs, it's really important to embrace and in some cases maybe stop investing in other old technologies, and look forward and innovate, because in some cases it's existential now, right? There will be companies that out innovate others with Gen AI, whether it's LLMs, SLMs, whatever that might be. It is really important to have that stack, right? So open data with Gen AI on top is that next gen stack. It's proven, it's extremely proven now, and so it's time to start getting there soon, if you haven't done so already.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me, share your experience working in this ecosystem, your insight into the Microsoft Fabric product. It's definitely a very interesting platform. It's great to see more investment in open data lake infrastructure, the entree into the enterprise. So appreciate the time and energy you're putting into this space, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other shows, Podcast.init, which covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used, and the Machine Learning Podcast, which helps you go from idea to production with machine learning. Visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends and coworkers.